When a world-famous athlete boarded a quiet overnight flight from Cairo to London, no one expected turbulence beyond the clouds, until a power-tripping flight stewardess ignited a confrontation with Mohamed Salah so intense it silenced the entire cabin. But what happened next shocked everyone. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because tomorrow we have an exciting story you won't want to miss. It all started on Flight EZ782, an overnight route from Cairo International to Heathrow. The flight manifest listed a full cabin, mostly routine passengers, business people, tourists, a few diplomats heading to Europe. But one name stood out: Mohamed Salah, Liverpool's Egyptian king, a global icon of sport and humility, traveling alone, quietly, no entourage, no flash, just a hoodie, a carry-on, and the kind of quiet confidence that's earned, not flaunted. He boarded early in first class, nodding politely to the crew, taking his seat without fuss. The moment his sneakers touched the cabin floor, though, eyes turned, some out of admiration, others out of something more complicated. Not everyone on that plane came with clean intentions. Among the cabin crew was a stewardess named Miranda Vale. To the untrained eye, she was just another crew member, but her colleagues had long whispered about her behind closed doors. Her track record was checkered, arrogant, obsessed with control, and something more insidious, an open disdain for celebrities, which many said was less about fame and more about who the fame belonged to. From the first moment she saw Salah, Miranda's eyes narrowed, not with recognition, but calculation. She approached him during pre-boarding checks with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, I assume you're familiar with our policies on personal conduct. Some passengers tend to attract a little too much attention." Salah looked up a little confused. "I'm just here to rest, that all right?" "Oh, of course," she said sweetly, then added under her breath, "as long as you don't make the other guests uncomfortable." It was subtle, barely audible, but deliberate, and Salah heard it. Still, he said nothing. The plane took off. 2 hours into the flight, while most passengers were dozing or watching seatback screens, Miranda returned with refreshments. Her tone had shifted from cool professionalism to thinly veiled contempt. She hovered over Salah, offering him water with a forced smile. "You know," she said lightly, almost as if to herself, "it's strange how some people forget that. This is a shared space. I've seen people like you make others feel uneasy without even speaking." Salah raised an eyebrow. "People like me?" "You know," she shrugged, "men who walk around with that self-importance, the kind that makes people wonder if they're safe." The implication hung in the air like poison. Across the aisle, a man in his late 50s quietly removed one earbud. Grey crew cut, square shoulders, posture like a statue. He watched, silently. Salah glanced at Miranda, his tone calm, measured. "I'm not sure what you mean, but I think you're saying something you shouldn't." "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking," Miranda replied smoothly. "There's a reason certain passengers, especially high-profile ones, from certain backgrounds, tend to cause tension. People remember things." She didn't say what things. She didn't have to. The air shifted. The ex-Marine across the aisle, retired Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Burke, leaned forward slightly, arms crossed. His expression unreadable, his eyes locked on Miranda. Salah looked away, not out of submission, but their discipline. Years of being baited in stadiums, in press rooms, on social media had trained him for this exact moment. He closed his eyes, inhaled, and let it pass. But Miranda didn't stop. She circled back 30 minutes later with another jab, this time louder. "This time for everyone to hear. Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly, standing beside his seat with arms folded. "Do you ever think about how your presence might trigger people? I mean, in a confined space like this, some might feel threatened." Voices lowered nearby. People were listening now. Salah looked up. "I'm a footballer. I don't know what kind of threat that makes me." Miranda's smile widened. "Not a footballer, an influencer, with a very large audience, the kind that makes people wonder about your intentions." It was a wild, racially charged accusation, veiled in aviation speak, the kind of vague innuendo meant to imply something dark without ever naming it. "I think you're confusing me with someone else," Salah said calmly. "I think I'm not," Miranda replied, tilting her head. And that's when Daniel Burke spoke. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice low and commanding. "I've been watching. You've had a problem with him since he got on this plane. I don't know what your issue is, but you're walking a very thin line." Miranda turned sharply. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Burke said, "and so did everyone else in this section. You've harassed that man 3 times. He hasn't said a damn word out of line. So tell me, what exactly are you trying to do here?" Passengers nearby stirred, phones angled slightly. No one wanted to be obvious, but everyone wanted the footage. Miranda stiffened. "This is not your concern." "It is now," Burke said, standing. "Because I've had to de-escalate more situations than you've had bad coffee, and I know where this is heading. You've got a problem with this man, and it's not about safety, it's about something else." Salah remained in his seat, motionless, calm. But something in his eyes had changed. A flicker of weariness, like a man who'd seen this movie too many times. Miranda looked flustered for the first time, her lips parted, searching for something to say. But nothing came. Burke wasn't done. "Now I suggest you walk away, cool off, and start acting like a professional before this turns into a full-blown incident. You're lucky he hasn't said a word. If it were me, I'd be filing a report already." Miranda turned on her heel and walked briskly toward the galley, her thin line of red creeping up her neck. The passengers were dead silent. Salah finally turned to Burke. Nodded once. "Thanks." Burke nodded back. "You handled that better than most." But the situation was far from over, because just 10 minutes later Miranda wasn't in the galley. She was on the phone with someone high up in the airline chain of command. Her voice was trembling, not with fear, with fury, and what she was about to do next would flip the entire flight upside down. Miranda Vale stood hunched in the narrow galley, her phone clutched tightly to her ear, voice low but sharp. It was a direct line, not to the captain, not to security, but to the regional director of flight operations, Eleanor Clark. A woman known for keeping problems quiet and cleaning up messes that could embarrass the airline. Miranda's tone was calculated panic. "There's a situation," she said quickly. "A high-profile passenger is exhibiting concerning behavior. He's making passengers uncomfortable. I've tried to de-escalate, but he's not cooperating. It's Mohamed Salah." There was a pause on the line. "How you're saying Salah is the problem?" came Eleanor's clipped voice. "Be specific." Miranda glanced around, lowering her voice. "He's intimidating. He's got this air about him. Aggressive. He's drawing attention, and I'm concerned for passenger safety. And now one of the other passengers is getting involved, some ex-military type. It's escalating." Another pause. This one longer. "I'll be speaking with the captain," Eleanor finally replied. "Keep your composure. We'll monitor." Miranda ended the call, her lips curling into a tight smirk. She adjusted her uniform and returned to the cabin, shoulders squared, like someone walking back into a battle she thought she'd already won. But the atmosphere had shifted. The tension from earlier hadn't dissipated. It had condensed, thickened, the kind that made every glance feel heavier, every whisper loaded with suspicion. Salah sat still, his gaze forward, ignoring the curious stares from passengers on both sides of the aisle. Across from him, Burke hadn't taken his eyes off Miranda once. His arms remained crossed, the steady focus of a man trained to see warning signs before anyone else did. She approached again. "Mr. Salah," she said, her tone now sharper, the mask of politeness gone, "I've been advised to remind you that any disruption to passenger comfort or safety can result in consequences, including potential detainment upon landing." Salah turned to her slowly, measured. "I haven't done anything." "You've created an atmosphere," Miranda replied. "The other passengers feel it. The intimidation, the discomfort. Your presence is instigating." That was the moment Burke stood up again, taller this time, louder. "Lady, are you out of your damn mind?" His voice cut through the cabin like a crack of thunder. Heads turned, phones came out. The quiet whisper of camera apps activating swept through the air like wind through dry leaves. Miranda wheeled on him. Sit down, sir. This does not concern you. The hell it doesn't, Burke shot back. You're targeting this man. You've been poking and prodding him since boarding, and now you're trying to weaponize airline protocol to make him the problem? I've been sitting here the entire flight. He hasn't raised his voice once, hasn't even moved. You're the one who keeps coming back. Why? Miranda faltered. Just for a second. Because it's my job to ensure safety, she said quickly. And I know what a threat looks like. No, you know what bias looks like, Burke growled. And you're looking for an excuse to act on it. You've got a chip on your shoulder, and now you're dragging this entire plane into your power trip. The captain's voice chimed on over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're currently investigating a cabin issue and ask for your cooperation. Do not interfere with the flight crew. Miranda's eyes flashed with vindication. You see, she said, protocol's in motion. But Burke wasn't backing down. You think just because you made a phone call you've won? That someone's going to take your word over the literal video evidence being recorded right now? He gestured. To the passengers. Half a dozen phones now discreetly pointed their way. This isn't 1997. People see you. People hear what you're saying. Miranda's breath caught. Behind her, a voice joined in. From a woman 3 rows back. She's been targeting him since takeoff. Another voice. I heard everything. She said he was threatening without doing anything. Miranda spun, eyes darting, watching her authority crumble in real time. A flight attendant near the back moved forward cautiously, whispering in Miranda's ear. Whatever was said made Miranda's jaw tighten. Then, movement. A tall woman in a navy blue suit stepped into the cabin from the cockpit hallway. Sharp features, short-cropped hair, and a badge on her chest. Eleanor Clark, Director of Flight Operations. So that phone call had been more than just protocol. She walked calmly to the scene, her presence commanding silence. She took one look at Miranda, one look at Salah, and then glanced at Burke. I've been monitoring the situation, she said plainly, and I want everyone to remain calm. Miranda immediately took the offensive. This passenger, Mr. Salah, has been causing discomfort to others and— Enough, Eleanor said, raising a hand. I've reviewed cabin reports. I've spoken to the captain. I've spoken to passengers. And I've watched surveillance from the front cabin feed. Miranda's mouth opened, but Eleanor didn't stop. What I've seen is a pattern of behavior, your behavior, that raises far more concern than anything Mr. Salah has done. You've initiated contact multiple times. You've made suggestive and racially loaded comments. You've escalated without cause. I was ensuring safety. No, Eleanor interrupted coldly. You were targeting a passenger, and you've done it before. That silenced even the whispering passengers. Salah said nothing, not a single word. Eleanor turned to him with calm professionalism. Mr. Salah, I apologize. This situation should never have reached this point. You've acted with restraint and dignity throughout. He nodded slightly, his eyes tired but steady. Thank you. Eleanor turned back to Miranda. You are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. You'll be removed from crew status. Upon landing and placed under review, Miranda's face flushed crimson. You're taking his side? I'm taking the right side, Eleanor said, and you're lucky this didn't escalate further. The cabin was frozen. Miranda stood there, speechless, breath shallow, fists clenched, until finally she stepped back, shaking, retreating to the galley like a defeated general whose army had vanished. But the story wasn't over, because humiliation was only the beginning, and the next few minutes would force Miranda to face something she'd avoided her entire life. Accountability. It was a word Miranda Vale had spent years outrunning. Her career built on perfectly balancing the illusion of authority with just enough charm to get away with what others wouldn't. She'd seen it all before, celebs throwing tantrums, passengers drunk on their own egos, colleagues too spineless to confront her sharp tongue. But tonight was different, because tonight the entire cabin had turned into a courtroom. And every passenger was now a silent juror. The galley was ice cold, not physically, emotionally. Miranda stood rigid, staring blankly at the stainless steel drawers, breath shallow. The last thing she heard before ducking away was the passenger, in 1C, muttering, About time someone put her in check. Then the whispering began. Voices she couldn't place. Words she couldn't ignore. Words like, she really tried to spin that, like he was dangerous. I've never seen someone so calm get targeted like that. She picked the wrong one. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, the air was still thick with tension. Salah remained seated, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Not angry, not smug. Just tired. The kind of fatigue that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from years of being quietly watched, judged, underestimated. Burke was back in his seat too, but his eyes kept drifting to the galley, waiting. Ready, just in case. Then, Eleanor Clark returned. No announcement, no dramatics. She just walked calmly back into the first-class cabin, her presence alone forcing people to lower their voices and lean in. She stopped beside Salah's seat. If you'd prefer to be moved, Mr. Salah, we have a private cabin in the front. Salah shook his head. I'm fine here. A pause. Very well, we've begun an internal incident report, and I want to be clear. This will not be swept under the rug. I'm used to people trying to make things disappear, Salah said flatly. You've been fair, that's enough. Eleanor studied him for a moment, then nodded and walked off again. But that wasn't the end of it. Miranda didn't stay. Hidden. No, someone like her never lets others have the final word. Minutes later, she reappeared, this time without her flight attendant blazer, now just in a crisp white shirt, hair pulled back tightly. She walked with a strange mix of defiance and desperation, eyes darting to every passenger as she made her way up the aisle. And then, to everyone's disbelief, she stopped in front of Salah. I need to speak to you, she said. Burke half rose, from his seat again instinctively. It's all right, Salah said quietly, without even looking at him. Miranda's voice dropped. Not here, just a minute, in private. Salah exhaled, measured, controlled. He stood slowly and followed her toward the curtain near the galley, past passengers craning their necks to catch every fragment of the scene unfolding like live theatre. Behind the curtain, Miranda turned to face him. For a second there was nothing but the low hum of engines and the muffled chatter of the cabin behind them. Then she spoke. I messed up. Salah said nothing. I know how that sounds, and I know it doesn't change anything. She continued, but I need you to hear me say it. I misjudged you. Still silence. Miranda's hands trembled slightly as she wrung them together. I've dealt with entitled passengers, celebrities, influencers, people who treat the crew like dirt. I guess I came into this flight already on edge. And when I saw you, I didn't see you. I saw what I wanted to see, and I acted like it. She paused, watching his face for any flicker of reaction. You didn't deserve that. Finally, Salah looked at her. You don't know me, he said quietly. You assumed a lot, but you don't know anything about me. I know that now, she said, her voice cracking. No, you don't, he said, still calm, but firm. You don't know what it's like to be followed in airports, to be searched twice as long, to be stared at because of your name or your beard or your skin. You don't know what it's like to sit quietly and still be seen as a threat. She opened her mouth, but he raised a hand. I'm not here to make you feel better. That's not my job. I've been in rooms where people like you whisper behind my back. I've heard the jokes, I've seen the fear in people's eyes just because I walked in. He stepped closer, not aggressive, just grounded. You didn't see me. You saw what you were afraid of. Miranda swallowed hard. You're right. Salah looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to leave. I'm sorry, she said, almost too quietly to hear. He didn't turn back, but just before passing through the curtain, he paused and said, Do better, that's all. And then he stepped back into the cabin. Miranda stood frozen in the galley, surrounded by cold steel drawers and the faint buzz of intercom static. She had expected a fight. She had expected fury, maybe even threats of legal action. But what she got instead was reflection, the kind that doesn't fade when the flight lands. Back in the cabin, Salah returned to his seat. Burke gave him a questioning glance. All good, Salah said, voice low. Burke nodded slowly. handled like a pro. Around them, passengers were still watching. Some nodded quietly in respect. Others looked down, ashamed of having stayed silent for so long. The woman in 3B leaned over. "Mr. Salah," she whispered, "I just wanted to say, the way you handled that, it meant something." He gave her a faint smile. But the cabin wasn't quite done yet, because as the flight began its descent, another ripple went through the passengers. Someone had uploaded footage of the confrontation. A clip of Miranda confronting Salah, Burke stepping in, Eleanor walking down the aisle like justice in heels. And now that video was blowing up. In real time, people on the plane were watching the comments pour in. Salah did nothing wrong. That stewardess was out of control. The Marine's a legend. How often does this happen without witnesses? The irony? This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was about to become a headline. Within minutes of the plane beginning its descent, the cabin was no longer just a place of tense silence. It was a pressure cooker of buzzing phones, quiet gasps, and passengers elbowing each other to whisper, "Have you seen this?" The video, hastily recorded from a tilted seatback angle, had already crossed 300,000 views. The caption, "Mohamed Salah confronted mid-flight by racist stewardess. Marine steps in." The clip was raw, grainy, but authentic. Miranda's voice, sharp and accusatory. Burke's interruption, measured and fierce. And Salah, calm, restrained, dignified. By the time the plane landed on the Heathrow tarmac, the number had doubled. The captain's voice came over the intercom, trying to keep the mood sterile. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. Local time is 6:43 a.m. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is off. We thank you for flying with us." But no one moved, not right away, because now they weren't just passengers. They were witnesses to something bigger than a mid-air incident. Miranda didn't reappear after landing. She remained tucked away in the galley, face pale, hands trembling, knowing exactly what was waiting for her once that door opened. Eleanor Clark stood at the front of the plane, composed, phone in hand, already on with the airline's crisis. Communications team. The PR storm had arrived before they even pulled into the gate. Salah sat quietly, scrolling through his own feed. He didn't post. He didn't comment. But the narrative had already run ahead of him, fueled not by rage, but by public respect for the way he'd handled himself. Calm in chaos, grace under fire. As the seatbelt sign clicked off and passengers began to collect their belongings, a few made their way to Salah, not for selfies, not for autographs, but for something more grounded. "Thank you for the way you handled that," said one middle-aged man in a blazer. "My daughter was watching. She's never seen dignity like that up close." "I've seen this sort of thing before," another whispered, "but no one ever says anything. Not like you did." The woman in 3B left a note on a napkin and discreetly handed it to him as she passed. "They wanted you to lose your temper. Instead, you gave them a lesson." Burke, standing tall with his carry-on slung over one shoulder, lingered just a moment longer before exiting. "Never thought I'd be breaking up a civil rights violation at 30,000 feet, he said with a small, tight smile. "But I'm glad I was here." Salah finally gave him a proper nod. "You did more than most." "You made it easy," Burke replied. "They'll remember this one." And then he was gone, disappearing into the stream of passengers filing out. Airport security was waiting at the jet bridge, not for Salah, not for Burke, but for Miranda Vale. 2 uniformed personnel, along with an airline HR rep and a legal observer. Miranda exited last, escorted without spectacle, no cuffs. Just the long walk that comes after the truth finally outpaces control. The moment she stepped into the terminal, flash photography exploded. Word had gotten out. TMZ, Sky News, social media journalists. They'd all been waiting. The footage was now international, with hashtags like Dang Flight 781 and Justice for Salah trending globally. By breakfast time in London, it was the top story. Salah didn't speak to reporters. He walked calmly through Heathrow, escorted not by bodyguards, but by airport staff keeping press at bay. He declined interviews, declined statements, but he didn't need to speak. Everyone else already was. By late afternoon, The airline released a formal statement. "We are aware of an incident involving one of our crew members and a passenger. We take allegations of racism and misconduct with the utmost seriousness. The crew member in question has been suspended pending investigation, and we offer our sincerest apologies to Mr. Salah for the experience he endured. We are committed to retraining and accountability across our organization." Still, the damage was done. Clips from the flight flooded TikTok and YouTube. Commentary channels lit up. News anchors debated the implications, not just about Miranda Vale, but about institutional bias, microaggressions, and how easily power can be weaponized at 35,000 feet. And somewhere in a modest hotel room in West London, Mohamed Salah watched in silence as panelists on a talk show dissected every moment of the flight. He had every right to blow up, but he didn't. That's restraint, that's class. The stewardess saw a stereotype. The Marine saw a man. That's the difference. It's not about this one incident. It's about all the times. No one had a camera and no one stepped in. He turned the volume down and let the room settle. He wasn't angry. Not anymore. He wasn't surprised either. But something had shifted. The world had seen not just who he was, but what he had to carry just to move through it. The scrutiny, the suspicion, the tightrope walk of being visible and invisible at the same time. Hours later, his phone buzzed. A message from Eleanor Clark. "Thank you again for your grace. We are implementing mandatory bias and de-escalation training across all flight crews. Starting next week." Salah stared at it for a moment, then simply replied, "Start with empathy. Everything else will follow." And that was it. The story wouldn't be forgotten. It would live on in commentary videos, airline policies, HR seminars, and whispered stories between passengers on future flights. But it didn't end with rage. It didn't end with shouting. It ended with a man who chose not to match hate with fire, but with something far more powerful: control, dignity, and truth. And in a world obsessed with spectacle, that's what made the biggest impact of all.